Hey everybody, what's going on? And welcome to Guns N' Roses Central, and it's another episode of Guns N' Roses True Stories. So today we're talking about the Use Your Illusion 2 song, Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Now this is the second cover that Guns N' Roses included on their double album, and this song is actually on Use Your Illusion 2. So Knockin' on Heaven's Door is actually song number 4 off the album, and it was originally written by Bob Dylan back in 1973. And the song was originally written for a 1973 movie called Pat Garrett and the Billy Kid, and it was of course released as a single by Bob Dylan and reached number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart. Now, while the song was included on Guns N' Roses' 1991 album, it was actually part of their set list pretty early on into their career. So in 1987, Guns N' Roses started to include the song in their live sets. So a live version of the song was actually released on the maxi single of Welcome to the Jungle the same year, and they recorded a studio version in 1990 for the soundtrack of the Tom Cruise film Days of Thunder. And that soundtrack song actually reached number 18 on the Billboard album rock charts in 1990. And if you guys want to listen to the Days of Thunder version of the song, I've linked to it down below. The version was slightly later modified for the 1991 album Use Your Illusion 2. They basically discarded the responses in the second verse, and then it was also released as the fourth single from Use Your Illusion 2. And it sounds somewhat similar to another song on Use Your Illusion 2, which is So Fine. And when Knockin' on Heaven's Door was released as a single, also included on the single was their live performance at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert back in 1992. That was used as a B-side for the single release and was also of course included on the Live Era album, which was released in 1999. Looking at who actually played on the actual song, Dizzy Reed does not play on the song. It's the original 5 members, with the exception of Steven Adler. Of course, Matt Sorum plays drums on the song, and the background vocals are done by Axl and a group called The Waters. Now, the first time Knockin' on Heaven's Door was actually included as part of Guns N' Roses' set list was at the shows they did at the Marquee in London. So this was recounted by Slash in an interview he did back in 1992. He said, "I was staying at someone's apartment and Axl was at his place, and we were on the phone talking about covers for the shows at the Marquee in London. And that song came up, and I was like, I've always wanted to do that song." And he was like, "Yeah, that'd be awesome." So we went to the Marquee and did it at Soundcheck and just did it that night. It's gone through a lot of changes over the years. Actually, we had a punk rock version of it at first, and we finally mellowed it out to an actual song that sounds like we thought it should sound like. But that was while recording. When we play it live, it's sort of a crossover, very hard and heavy, but at the same time, sort of like the album. And in Duff's book, he talked a bit about the Marquee show as well. He said at Soundcheck before the first show, on June 19th, 1987, we ran through a cover of the song. We played it just once, but somehow our feelings found a vessel in the Bob Dylan song, and our emotions just came pouring out. And Slash later commented on the Marquee shows in his book as well. He said those Marquee shows were loud and hell-bent. What I remember fondly. One of those nights was also the first time we had ever played Knockin' on Heaven's Door, which we put together at Soundcheck on a whim. I've always loved that song and loved the live version. It was much more raw than what ended up on the Use Your Illusion albums. And Steven Adler also told his story of the Marquee shows in his book, which came out in 2010, although his dates seem to be a little different than Slash and Duff's. So he said, on Thursday, June 11th, 1988, we were ready to perform our very first gig in Europe at the Marquee in London. During soundcheck, the guys started into rocking a song that I wasn't sure I'd heard before. I was like, wow, this is a cool new tune. It was haunting familiarity to me that I couldn't quite place. Since Axl wasn't there yet, Izzy and Duff started singing it in the second time around, and only did I realize it was Knockin' on Heaven's Door. I smiled, oh yeah, it's that song. I realized we were talking about classic Bob Dylan tune and rocking out on it, taking it solidly under our wing into Guns N' Roses territory. It was Axl's idea to do Knockin' on Heaven's Door. He told Slash about it, they learned it, and we did it. They never even mentioned it to me, though just expecting me to pick up and play the beat on the fly. I didn't know if there was a tribute to my drumming adaptability or a sign of their abject disregard for my needs as members of the band, but I could venture a pretty good fucking guess. So the third night that Guns N' Roses played at the Marquee, that show is actually available on YouTube with the version of Knockin' on Heaven's Door they performed, so I've linked to it down below in the description box if you guys want to check it out. And perhaps the best live version of Knockin' on Heaven's Door that was released during the 80s, or that's available on YouTube, is the version they played at the Ritz show back in 1988, and I've linked to that one too. And let's now talk about the recording of Knockin' on Heaven's Door on the Illusions Records. So this has been talked about quite a bit by Slash in the past. So Slash said the first recording with Matt Sorum was Knockin' on Heaven's Door for the Days of Thunder soundtrack, which also ended up on the Illusions albums. I remember doing the solo for it in my way somewhere, and I used a 58 Gibson Explorer. It was an amazing take. I just ran in there with my girlfriend and some friends in tow, picked up the guitar, and really let that solo sing. I turned the tone down on the bass pickup, I locked it and let it scream. I really loved the way that one came out. It was very emotional yet effortless, and this was stated in his 2007 autobiography. Now, in an interview that Slash did for Practicing Musician in April of 1990, he said Heaven's Door has the same sound in it as the solos as on Estranged, and that's the Explorer on the rhythm pickup with the tone down. There are 2 solo sections on that song. I've been playing these solos off cuff since we started playing the song, but when we went into the studio to do it, I played it completely different than I've ever played it. I did this whole melody off the top of my head. I did one solo one day and the next solo the next day, and they were both one take. The outro solo I did in the first day after I came up with the melody for the first solo. I did the second one and Mike Klink wasn't really happy with it. I thought it was fine. I took it home and listened to it. The next morning on my way somewhere, I stopped by the studio and just pulled it off one more time and did it way better. Izzy also commented on the song in an interview he did back in 2010. He said, "Knockin' on Heaven's Door was brilliant. We took that old song from Bob Dylan and turned it into a kind of hymn. That was special." And then one noticeable difference that Guns N' Roses have in their version of the song compared to the original by Bob Dylan is that there's actually a phone call in the actual middle part of the song, and then there's like a spoken word part of the song. And I haven't been able to nail down an exact meaning for what it represents, but people think that it refers to drug use. And some people think it refers to Axl making a call to his drug dealer. And not only that, some fans have went so far to actually wonder what number is being dialed during that section of the song. So according to Google, it's 659-8890. Now let's talk about some special live performances of the song. So during 1987, Guns was touring and they played Heaven's Door on pretty much every single show. So they played a show in Toronto, Canada back in August of 1987. They were opening for The Cult, and Knockin' on Heaven's Door was actually dedicated to The Cult for treating GNR so well on tour. And later on in 1987, at a show that Guns did in San Diego, California in September of 87, Knockin' on Heaven's Door was dedicated to Todd Crew. Axl called Todd Crew one of the best people that ever lived, and Axl even let some fans trade vocals on Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Now, for those who don't know, Todd Crew was a member of the San Francisco-based hard rock band Jet Boy, and he's talked about pretty extensively in Slash's book. He died of a drug overdose in 1987 in Slash's hotel room. And at several other shows throughout 1987, they dedicated Heaven's Door to Todd Crew. And then there was even a show that Guns N' Roses did at the Ritz back in 1987. No, not 1988. There was actually a show at the Ritz in 87 where some footage is actually leaked online. And during Heaven's Door, Dave Mustaine actually appears on stage for a little bit. And at a show that Guns did in Fort Myers back in November of 87, Axl dedicated Heaven's Door to getting through this bitch we call life the best we can. And then at a show that Guns did in Toronto, Canada back in 1991, Axl mentioned that 4 years ago he wanted the band to play Knockin' on Heaven's Door because he wanted this generation to hear it. And during Gilby's second show with Guns N' Roses in Worcester, Massachusetts back in 1991, Axl sang the phone part in Knockin' on Heaven's Door during their live performance. It's important to note that in most live performances they did not sing the phone part with the exception of this one show in Massachusetts. Now, the best live performance of the actual song was probably at the Freddie Mercury tribute show that happened in April of 1992 and was of course later included on the Live Era album. Now, there was a lot of controversy around Guns N' Roses actually playing the show, largely because of the song One in a Million, which had homophobic remarks. So there was a gay activist group named ACT UP that stated that Guns N' Roses shouldn't be included on the show because Axl allegedly made some homophobic remarks. And that was difficult to handle because Axl really didn't talk to the press or the media that much. So a lot of the members of Queen had to speak up on that issue. So Brian May said it was a massive strain on our shoulders because we weren't just performing, we were also organizing everybody else. It was difficult enough choosing the acts who would appear. We argued a lot amongst ourselves about the bill, but the basic criteria for the acts finally selected was their relevance to Freddie. Now, the members of Guns N' Roses were nervous that Axl may speak up or say something during Guns N' Roses' set. And thankfully, Axl didn't say anything. The members were worried that Axl would say something and it could overshadow the actual purpose of holding the event, which was in memory of Freddie Mercury. Now, Guns N' Roses played 2 songs. They opened with Paradise City, and then they closed with Knockin' on Heaven's Door. So just before Knockin' on Heaven's Door, you can see Duff walk up to Axl and sort of give him like a an appreciation for not saying anything, and sort of says thank you for keeping quiet on the whole controversy. But during the actual set, when they were playing Paradise City, it looked like there were some protesters, and you can see Axl say "shove it," and he's basically referring to the protesters who were protesting Guns N' Roses appearing on the bill. And Joe Elliott of Duff Leppard actually talked about Duff at the show. He said, "Duff McKagan was fucked up beyond belief. I stepped over him when he was lying on some stairs backstage. He was just a mess. That was after Guns N' Roses had finished their set. I watched it and Duff was flawless. He's a brilliant bass player, but he was mullered." And during the Use Your Illusion tour, Guns N' Roses played Heaven's Door pretty much at every show. There was a couple shows where Axl got pissed off and walked off stage, and sometimes Heaven's Door would be the last song on the set list instead of Paradise City. And throughout the years, 91, 92, the actual song, the arrangement was pretty similar to one another. It wasn't until the Skin and Bones tour that they changed the song up a bit, and they played Heaven's Door acoustically as part of their acoustic set of the Skin and Bones tour. However, there was one show in Paris, France, they played back in late 1993, where they actually played Heaven's Door like they did back during 1991 and 1992. And the Paris 1993 performance is special because they actually brought Brian May out, who was opening for Guns N' Roses. He joined the band on stage to play Heaven's Door, and they actually brought in some backup singers, I think from Brian's band, as well as one of their friends who was in a cast at the time. So it's a really great version of the song. I've linked to it down below. Go check it out. And if you guys want to see how the acoustic version of Heaven's Door sounds, there's a good pro shot clip of it from a show that Guns did back in June of 1993 in the Netherlands, or you guys can go watch the Argentina show from 93 as well. And usually when Guns N' Roses would play Knockin' on Heaven's Door, it's much longer than the actual album version that appeared on Use Your Illusion 2, and it actually included a pretty long bridge that even featured a reggae section as well. And it's the 5th most played Guns N' Roses song of all time if you guys look at setlist.fm. Now if you guys go listen to Knockin' on Heaven's Door and how it's been played over the years, you'll notice that the arrangements change. So how they played in the 80s is different than how they played in the 90s, and it's different how they played in the 2000s, and even as part of the reunion tour. But one thing sort of stay consistent is that Axl, usually towards the end of the song, when he's singing the chorus, he likes to trade off between himself singing it and the audience singing it. And then in an interview Axl did with Interview magazine back in 1992, he commented on singing the song live. He said, "And then there are times when everybody comes together, like in singing Knockin' on Heaven's Door. That's one reason we do the song, it's for the people." Now at Rock in Rio back in 2001, just before playing the song, Axl addressed the audience and told them that since it's a new version of Guns N' Roses playing the song, they actually wanted to play it closer to the original version than how they played it back in the day with the old lineup of the band. And there were even rumors in 1999 that Guns N' Roses were going to be reuniting because Duff, Slash, and Matt appeared at the 1999 Slam Dance Festival. They were there promoting a song that they'd worked on, and they'd actually done a live performance at the actual festival, and one of the songs they actually played was Knockin' on Heaven's Door. So if you guys want to see the MTV clip from it, I've linked to it down below. And Adam Sandler actually imitated Axl Rose during one of his stand-up specials. During the early 90s, he imitated Axl singing Knockin' on Heaven's Door on a guitar, and then he also pretended that he was Axl Rose one moment, and then he turned into Edith Bunker from All in the Family later on. And what's funny is that even though Guns N' Roses covered a Bob Dylan song, Slash actually played with Bob Dylan back in 1989, 1990 on one of his songs called Wiggle Wiggle. And Slash told this story in an interview, which Radio.com actually created a whole cartoon out of, which is actually really amusing and entertaining to watch, and I've linked to it down below. And Slash talks about how he played an acoustic section on the song, as well as he did a one-off solo, which he thought was one of his better one-off solos he's done before. But when he actually got the tape after everything was mixed, they actually removed his solo because, according to Bob Dylan's manager, it sounded too much like Guns N' Roses. But they kept Slash's acoustic section on the song. Now, Bob Dylan briefly commented on his feelings about Guns N' Roses. So as you guys know, we've been talking this whole episode, they did a cover of Knockin' on Heaven's Door. And the following year it came out, Dylan was asked about his thoughts. And he said Guns N' Roses is okay, Slash is okay, but there's something about their version of the song that reminds me of the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Just to give you guys some context, Invasion of the Body Snatchers was a 1956 American black and white sci-fi horror film that was partially shot in film noir style. So if you guys want to read more about it, I've linked to its Wikipedia page down below. A lot of people have said that Guns N' Roses' version of Knockin' on Heaven's Door is actually more recognizable than the Bob Dylan version, and some people have said the Guns N' Roses version is better than the original version. So Guitar One magazine listed the 10 best covers of rock songs in their July 2004 issue, and there's a Guns N' Roses mention. So their top 10 songs, Heaven's Door ranked number 4th, Born to Be Wild by Slayer was ranked number 3, Snowblind by System of a Down was ranked number 2, and Come On Feel the Noise by Quiet Riot was ranked number 1 on their list. Now let's look at where the song ranks on Guns N' Roses' best to worst song list. So according to Spin.com, they were not fans of the song. They ranked it 66th. They said had the song ended after Slash's second solo, it would have been much better, but the later half kind of ruins it with the phone message, the preening by Axl, and of course they said the gospel choir. It could have been great, but inflated egos killed it. Now, Medium.com was a little better. They said it was the 28th best song for them, and they said everybody starts swaying like Axl as soon as you strum out that GDC chord progression. And GuitarWorld.com did their rankings of just the Illusion songs, and Knockin' on Heaven's Door ranked, middle of the pack at 15th. And they said not a popular opinion, but Guns did their strongest covers on the Spaghetti Incident. Still, this one gets points for being a rock radio staple and for possibly being more popular than the original. Sorry, Dylan fans. Now let's look at how the single actually performed in the different countries it was released in. Now, the song is quite popular in Europe. It was in the top 10 charts in a lot of different countries. It reached gold certification in Australia and platinum in Italy. And even in the US itself, it ranked number 18 on the mainstream rock charts. So it's a pretty well-known song, and it's charted quite well throughout the world. So that does it for my retrospective and my look at Knockin' on Heaven's Door. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit the like button if you guys found this video useful and informative. And be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for all things related to Guns N' Roses, including news, reviews, previews, and anything else related to the band. And be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I post exclusive content on my Facebook and Twitter page that you won't find here on my YouTube channel. So the links to my social media icons are down below. And as always, guys, let me know your comments down below, and be sure to have yourself a good day.